Hi, class, and hello, professor. Um, I'd first off like to just apologize ahead of time for my extreme awkwardness, and in order to alleviate that awkwardness, I wrote myself some notes. I hope you don't mind, professor, because I'll get through this a lot quicker and a lot more smoothly if I've got some notes in front of me rather than just trying to spit up words and mess everything up over and over and over again. So, anyway, this starts me off at question number one, which reads, what does fitness mean in evolutionary terms? Well, when it comes to evolutionary terms, fitness is the average number of offspring produced by parents with a particular genotype compared to the number of offspring produced by parents with another genotype. Basically, this means that fitness is all about reproductive success and the passing of what made that reproduction successful onto the next generation. Now, in terms of crickets, fitness is all about finding a potential mate. This can be done through calling or even sneakiness, among other things. The trait or act that helps in the finding of a mate has a high probability of being passed down to the cricket's offspring. Question number two, is calling good or bad for a cricket's fitness? Well, I believe that calling can be either good or bad for a cricket's fitness, largely depending on the environment at the given time. For example, if the environment is filled with predators or other sneaky crickets, there's a large chance that calling will not be favorable. However, if the coast is clear and a cricket puts out a successful calling, this will improve that particular cricket's fitness. In this case, calling would be good. I just thought that it really depends on the situation given, especially with crickets specifically. Three different examples in this cricket story that described selection at work and eliminating traits in crickets that did not enhance their survivability would be as follows. Example one would be where the sneaky cricket outsmarts the calling cricket, and his sneaky traits are then passed on to his offspring. And example two, the calling cricket is in a favorable environment and successfully attracts a mate. In turn, the calling gene will then be passed down to the offspring. And in the third example, the cricket is incredibly buff and has a ferocious roar. This will lead or ward off predators and will most likely be passed down to the offspring. Question 4 is definitely the one that I had the most trouble on because I was pretty much arguing with myself back and forth between stabilizing and directional for probably a good 10 minutes. I ended up choosing that directional was the natural selection that was occurring in the story, and that was because, like the examples that were in our text, the sneaky cricket is favored here. Because of this, the fitness of the crickets with sneaky traits is going to be greater than that over the crickets that call. And over time, the population of calling crickets will decrease as more sneaky crickets are created. However, like the text or like the story mentions, this will lead to a decrease in the overall population because calling is a cricket's primary means of mating. It almost makes it seem like there was no selection because of the varying environment, and there's always going to be sneaky crickets and there's always going to be crickets that are calling. But between those three, I ended up choosing directional. And the last question was, in what specific way is the actual environment itself influencing cricket calling? Well, like the fun fact at the end describes, crickets will chirp more often if it's hotter. So basically, this means that if the environment is incredibly warm, obviously there's going to be a higher degree of crickets that use calling as their means of mating, as opposed to sneaky crickets. In fact, because there'd be so many calling crickets, it almost makes me feel like there'd be almost no sneaky crickets, because they'd all be calling. Also with the environment, like I mentioned before in my other examples of the questions, it just depends on what's going on at the time. There could be bats soaring around up there, and then the crickets chirp actually in turn wards their attention rather than those of female crickets, or there could be sneaky crickets in the environment too. I think the environment plays a humongous role when it comes to natural selection and when it comes to the cricket story in particular. So I made it. I got it through that. Thanks for listening to me, Professor. I appreciate you reading over this and hopefully giving me some feedback on this. So yeah, bye guys.